Well, good morning and welcome to our monthly seminar on basic cybersecurity items for businesses. And today's session, as we discuss preparing for insider threats, is going to be a really interesting topic for all of us to stop and consider. Now, just a couple of comments as we begin. First off, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box here, as we would love to talk about anything that might come to mind. But also take note as we work through this, the different topics and some of the things we're going to learn as we prepare for managing and handling insider threats. You know, as we talk about the topic of insider threats, it's one of those things that none of us want to think about. We don't want to consider that someone that we work with or employ or a vendor that we use or anything like that could present a threat to our organization. And so probably the first thing to think about is to ask the question, what exactly is an insider threat? One definition that I found out on the internet with regards to this said that simply this, that an insider threat is any person with access or knowledge about an organization's resources and who could intentionally or unintentionally harm that organization. Well, we all recognize that it is really easy to unintentionally do harm. We delete things by accident, we hit the wrong buttons, we've all done it. Okay, all done it one way or another. But what we often forget is that there are people who want to intentionally harm the organization. There's different kinds of insider threats that we can talk about, and they're generally categorized down into these three main issues. We've got malicious insiders. They may be somebody that works for the company and wants to show the company up as they walk out the door and they delete everything. We may have negligent insiders. That would be where many of us would fall at times, where we just do something by accident that causes harm. But a growing area to look at, and that's showing up more and more, is that of compromised insiders, where a threat actor on the outside gets someone that they know on the inside of that organization, and through blackmail or holding something for ransom or some kind of information, they compromise that person so that person feels like that they have to go ahead and do something to harm the company. Otherwise, whoever has compromised them will in turn do something bad to them. So when we talk about the different types of insider threats, these are the main categories that we look at. And it is indeed a very real issue to think about. I remember one organization that I was working with a number of years back, and this happened to be an online school organization that had their own, had internet provision and coming in through an ISP that was next door. And one individual at that ISP got very upset and angry and walked out the door. And as he walked out the door, they erased all the config files on the main routers and backups. So there was no way to restore the configuration files immediately. That caused a lot of problems for this little online school because they didn't have any way to get stuff broadcast out across the internet. So as we talk about insider threats, what are some things that we might want to look for to consider that we may have someone that's an insider threat and may have something that we need to deal with and handle? There's a number of indicators that we can look at when we talk about insider threats. Sometimes it's really difficult to recognize an insider threat because it's people we want to trust. And I know there have been times when folks I trusted when I was in other organizations who actually did something malicious on that. So at times recognizing an insider threat can be difficult, but there may be some things that we can look at. For example, it may be that we've got someone who started exhibiting odd behavior and coming in at odd hours of the night to do things. They may say they have to come in and do work or have to do whatever. Remember one organization that had some contact with where someone came in at odd hours, ended up printing thousands of pages on the printers, and that was their version of malicious on that. Sometimes people will want to use personal devices, and I should have added in here personal email instead of company devices. So suddenly you have company data or perhaps company trade secrets or something like that that has moved out and become part of their private emails and stuff. When in reality, what you really want is someone out there that's going to handle your data well and handle it carefully. By the way, I just see I don't have the camera on, so let me fix that right there. Okay, so we can have some indicators of an insider threat from behavior, and this is true. But we can also have indicators of an insider threat through technical indicators. For example, we may have someone that is using what's often called shadow IT. They may find it easier to use their personal Dropbox instead of using the company's SharePoint site. They may decide that they're going to use personal email to send certain documents through instead of using the company provided email system. They may decide that instead of using company internet, they're going to put a little router in their office and end up using their own Wi-Fi from someplace. So shadow IT, when it's installed, can be and should be a red flag that something's amiss and that there's a threat. May not be malicious, may just be negligent, but that there may very well be a threat of some kind at that point. But besides that, when we look at shadow IT, this is probably the biggest one, the last line here. Anytime someone starts moving data to unapproved resources, whether it be copying it to a flash drive, nowadays it's often moved to unapproved cloud services, your Google Workspace, Dropbox, 1,001 other different areas. And so when you find people that are starting to do things with your data that is not on the approved list of what you should be doing with your data, when you find people that are installing ways to get around the controls that IT has in place to manage it, all these should raise red flags in your mind as you think about how in the world am I going to stop or prevent or at least control insider threats. So when we talk about indicators, these are big indicators of it. So we talk about how in the world can we think about preventing an insider threat? And this is really hard. I've known some people who were in their organizations were fairly high up in mid-management, got mad and caused damage as they walked out the door. How do we think about preventing or at the very least mitigating or recovering from insider threats when they come our way? I'd like to suggest that there's a number of things we can do. First off, talk about employee training and awareness. We all talk about employee training. But when we talk about employee training here in this line, I guess it gets into the area of showing what's the approved things that we can do so that we are also laying out the list of what the unapproved things are that we don't want people doing. So back to the moving things to private cloud IT, for example, might have a policy and we might enforce it and we might go through the acceptance steps to say that someone needs to only use approved storage mechanisms by corporate IT. Somebody does differently, they're in violation, and that becomes an HR problem to go ahead and see how they're going to handle the violation. But besides employee training on what's appropriate and right to do, then there also has to be the awareness. We talk about cybersecurity awareness as being your first line of defense, and indeed it is. But we'd also talk about awareness in this stage from awareness to your management, to your IT people, to perhaps other employees. The old, if you see something, say something kind of thing. So that if you see somebody that looks like they are trying to or raising red flags, you say something as you try to figure out what's going on and figure out how to stop it. We also, as we talk about preventing insider threats, can implement robust security as well as personnel policies. The personnel policies piece kind of builds on what we talked about just a minute ago as far as employee training and awareness. But the robust security piece, hold on to that because we're going to come back to that in just a minute as we work through today's discussion on this. We can also, as we work through preventing insider threats, talk about implementing access control. Okay, so this is an area that causes a lot of anxiety many times for people. And so a lot of times in organizations, people will say, well, I don't know what all I'll have need to, therefore we just by default set them up with access to everything. And that's a very common way for a small organization to run. It's totally normal. It's not as secure as you want. Rather, many times the better approach is to take what's called role-based access control. So you say effectively, if this person is in this department, they need access to this stuff. And you set them up with the permissions to the stuff that they need. By default, that means then that as you're creating more documents or more data or whatever, that you then have to go ahead and work hard to be sure that the new stuff is placed in the right areas so that the people who need it can get access to it. So implementing access control really is a two-stage process. As you talk about not only what people can access, but then you talk about as more things are created, being sure it's stored in those places where people can go ahead and have the access to it. The next thing that you can do to help prevent insider threats is work, and that's performing regular audits and monitoring. So, for example, if I had monitoring set up on a certain folder so that I would know who all had access to that folder and was able to read documents. And so that every time somebody comes into this folder, there's a log created that shows everyone who accessed a particular folder and files, and it's recorded and it's right there. But that list doesn't do you any good unless you actually look at it and check it and monitor it. You can monitor it manually, which takes time, but it's probably one of the easiest, but it's a lot of time to do it. Or you can also set up automated ways to monitor stuff and to control what's out there and control and analyze who has actually read your stuff that is out there. Besides doing regular audits and monitoring stuff that you have, you can also take the step of adding in what's called data loss protection. Now, there's a number of different ways to do data loss protection. From a high level, this simply means that we're putting some kinds of automatic controls inside the document. Most of the time, this is done automatically. And that we know that as that document moves through our network, and even ultimately, if it were to move out of our network, that because we've got those controls on it, we're able to be sure that it doesn't go and exist someplace it shouldn't. It's possible, for example, to even make data loss protection set up so that if a certain document leaves your network, that document then turns around and basically destructs. So you're not able to read it. So data loss protection strategies, if you've got really important stuff, can be a good way of helping to control and to manage the risk that insiders might prevent. If you want to talk more about that, get a hold of me and we can do that. But no matter how hard you try to control things, it's going to be almost impossible to totally control all threats. And so, because we can't totally control all threats, we fall back on the fact that designing a thorough backup and recovery strategy is important. Just a minute. When I talk about designing a thorough backup, that means we've actually taken the time to set through the processes of what do we need to back up, how do we need to back it up, but then we also turn around and test the recovery strategies that are involved to be sure that what we backed up can actually be restored. I've seen a good number of times when people thought they had backups going. In fact, I ran into that just last week, where people thought they had good backups going and discovered later that something was wrong and the backups weren't indeed doing what they thought it was doing. So when we talk about a backup strategy, backing up is only a piece of the puzzle. It's only about half. You have to make backups, yes, but then you have to turn around and be sure you can recover off of those backups. Be sure your media is good, that you got all of the files that you think you got needed to get, that you actually had stuff on a format that was able to be recoverable. So you've got to have both parts of the strategy, both backup and recovery. And we'll come back to that and talk about in just a minute. But we're going to come now to what I think is the most interesting piece of the entire puzzle as we talk about talk about insider threats. And that interesting piece of the puzzle comes down to, how do we detect an insider threat when we find one, or when it's there? How do we know that somebody is indeed an insider threat? And how do we know that what's taking place is actually a risk? And then how do we handle it? Okay, so this is going to be fun. So how do we detect insider threats? Well, obviously, since we talked about behavior as being a first step, the first way to detect is going to be monitoring employee behavior. And that can be everything from asking the question, why are they clocking into the office at 2 a.m. in the morning when they're an 8 to 5 worker, to asking, why are we taking certain things out of the office when perhaps we shouldn't? There's a lot of ways this can go, but this issue of monitoring employee behavior is definitely an issue that HR should be involved in and HR should deal with. And let me state right off the bat, I am not an HR professional. I do not know that. But rather, the other way we can talk about detecting insider threats is through using technology. Technology is not the end all of everything, but it is one additional tool in your toolbox. And this is going to be fun. So if we're going to use technology to detect threats, and if you are running under the Microsoft Office 365 ecosystem, we're not talking about the Office where you have it installed on your separate computer. We're talking about the cloud product, the Microsoft Office 365 stuff. If you're using the business premium or higher versions of Office 365, there is some really cool stuff within this product to help you monitor and detect insider threats. And three particular items in the business premium and higher that are there that can help us are listed on the screen. We're going to take a look at these in more detail in just a minute, or as more of a summary in just a minute. First off, the first item within Business Premium is the Microsoft Purview portal. Now, I realize that's an odd name. If you go look under the admin consoles under your Microsoft Office administration portals, you'll find that it's referred to as the compliance portal or the compliance administration. So while there is a little bit of a naming mismatch between Purview and compliance, yet when you actually click the compliance button and go to the portal, it's actually going to be called the Microsoft Purview portal. And one of the features within the Purview portal that we're going to look at in just a minute is they actually have a section called Insider Risk Management Program. We'll look at that in just a minute. The Purview portal also has a second thing that can help you out. Remember, we talked about data loss protection. The Purview portal on Business Premium and higher can help you establish a data loss protection program. And there's actually a section in the Purview program portal called Data Loss Protection, which walks you through and helps you begin setting that up. The third thing in Business Premium that can help us here is in the Microsoft Security portal. And yes, it's actually called the Security portal here. And the Security portal can help you track and detect unauthorized cloud shadow IT. So, for example, if you've got someone in the organization who is copying files to their own personal Dropbox, this feature in the Security portal can help you detect that they're copying unauthorized files to their personal Dropbox account. If you've got an employee that established their own Google Workspaces account And unbeknownst to you, start putting data up there. The security portal can help you detect that, as it has features to help you detect when um, what cloud services are in use. So you can turn around then and make the discussion and the decision about whether or not those cloud services are appropriate and indeed authorized for your organization. Let's start walking through these a little bit and take just a really quick overview. We're going to begin with the Microsoft Purview portal with Insider Risk Management. This is our business Office 365 environment. So I logged in here, went back through the administration consoles to the compliance section, and you'll note as you look at the compliance section that it says Microsoft Purview portal right up here at the top. Didn't mean to move off of that. It says Microsoft Purview portal right up here at the top, as you can see that. And so as you look at this screen and look at what it is saying right up here. Oops, missed that. When you see it right up here, that means we're in the compliance portal. And if I get this drop-down box, I would see a section called Insider Risk Management. So I walk down through here and it starts walking through some processes about how in the world I can begin configuration to set things up for insider risk management. And it begins talking about I can turn on analytics to begin scanning for risks. I can learn more about what best practices and common terms are. I can define settings. And remember, insider risk for one organization, the controls may look different than what you use in another organization because our workflows, our data storage, our cloud products all look different. Then it walks through creating our policies. The policies are not HR policies. The policies are more practices of how the system is going to look and what things it's going to look for insider threats. And then we talk about assigning permissions so that somebody can get in here. The point is, as we walk through it, note that this is only the very first step about recommended actions. As we walk through this and begin establishing our policies and gathering evidence and begin protecting stuff, Microsoft Business Premium and Higher has some really good stuff built in to help us monitor and begin managing the insider threat risk. Second item, though, that we talked about a minute ago as we talked about technical controls. Let's see, let me get out of here. As we talked about technical controls, is also on the Purview or compliance portal, and it has to do with data loss protection. This is likewise another, get my pointer back. This is another element in the, okay, there we go. This is another element in the main drop-down box. So it helps you begin walking through the process to set up and configure analytics. What I like is that we have a very basic setup guide to begin talking about what we're going to do. We have some good instructional, good learning rules to help us understand about what kind of analytics are and what we're going to be looking for as we get into it. And then we begin classifying the activity. We begin alerting on things that look like they may be suspicious so we can catch what's going on, as well as exploring and looking at these activities in detail. It may have been that somebody had permission to take a file out of the office, but those are things we need to look at. So we can begin setting up data loss protection in conjunction with our compliance in order to begin configuring our insider risk management program. The third thing we looked at had to do, that we talked about a minute ago, had to do with cloud discovery. And notice we look at this is in a different administration console. It is still part of Microsoft Business Premium and Higher. And in this additional section, it talks about, under the security, it talks about setting up cloud discovery. So for example, we can use cloud discovery to begin deciding whether or not a particular cloud application is in use. It will categorize them and discover them. Just FYI, it doesn't all through the Microsoft Defender endpoint agent that would be installed as part of Business Premium. And then as you establish your policies on what cloud applications are justified and usable within your organization, it begins working through this. And you can see that as we look at our organization, it talks about traffic and what things are being used and who's been doing what with regards to cloud stuff. All very good, and all part of what helps us manage this insider risk question so that we can keep our stuff secure. All important things to do. Now, ultimately, we're all going to have to deal with insider threats of some kind. So how do we recover from an insider threat if that person, that individual does something? Well, from a personnel perspective, obviously HR is going to be involved. And with an insider threat, if something is done, then you need to look at your insurance. Obviously, the questions are they going to be involved in that? As well as consider whether or not law enforcement should be involved. So that can be a tricky question, and there's a lot of things to consider on that. From a technical perspective, we need to think about whether or not we have our incident response plan. Believe it or not, an insider threat is an incident just like someone from some Eastern European country hacking in and depositing ransomware is an incident. So as you have your incident response plan, a major component of that is going to be a tested backup and recovery plan. We've talked a lot about that. If you want to talk more about backups, we've got another webinar already on YouTube that talks about that. But when you recover from an insider threat, you've got personnel and technical issues, but you've also got legal and regulatory. Depending on your industry, you may have certain regulatory filings, or you may have certain things that have to be filed with government agencies. I don't know what it is. And as you walk through that with your legal staff, as well as your insurance company, as well as HR, that also brings up in this third section the question of whether or not law enforcement should be involved, whether or not that is a big enough issue that you want to have and that you want to talk about. Now, we just covered some of the high points of an insider threat, and I'm glad that you spent some time here this morning with us as we talk about that. If you have questions about it, you can find our webinars. This one will be posted shortly this afternoon up on our YouTube channel. If you want the handout that goes along with this webinar, you can find that at the URL listed there on your screen at our practicalcybersecurity.com website. And then if you've got questions, feel free to contact us, as we'd love to be of help to you with anything that you may have. Now, I don't know if anyone online has any questions or not, but if you'd like to, we've got a couple minutes we can work through questions. If there's something that you would like to talk about, post in the Q&A box, that would be great on there. Insider threats is unfortunately something that we all are having to deal with more and more. All right. Well, then I appreciate every one of you joining our webinar this morning as we talk about preparing for insider threats, probably one of the most unexpected things we have to deal with, but it's going to be there. I'm glad you came. Be sure to check out the resources that we've talked about here, and I hope to see you in next month's webinar as we continue our cybersecurity series. All right. Thanks for coming, guys. See you later.